Hello and welcome to Words of the Wild, a podcast brought to you by the Scottish Wildlife Trust. This is our very last episode. My name is Ed. As usual, I'm joined by my fantastic colleague and co-host.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel. I can't believe we're saying this. The final episode. So, if you hear some sniffling in the background, that is probably it.
Yeah, crying away.
So, we've had, a fantastic journey over the past sort of 7 episodes, hearing stories from across the Trust work and reserves, from our Scottish beaver trial to our conservation grazing to snorkel trails and so on. There's almost too much to mention. So if you've missed an episode, definitely go back and don't forget to check them out. But it's not over yet. So Ed, what do we have lined up for our final episode?
We've got a great one lined up as usual. So this week we are going to be talking all about the impact of invasive non-native species. We're going to hear from a few different people, investigate some of the projects that are working on invasive species control, as well as heading to one of our reserves down in Dumfries and Galloway.
Perfect. So for our first segment, we're going to hear from Hazel, who's our Species Advocacy Officer here at the Trust. She's going to introduce the topic of invasive non-native species.
Hazel, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you here.
Hi Ed, great to be here.
The first question really is if you could tell us a bit about your role and some of the work you do.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm the Species Policy Advisor for the Trust, and my job involves advocating for government policy that benefits species which the Trust have identified as priorities for policy action. I'm currently focused on beavers, Atlantic salmon, the potential for lynx reintroduction, and deer management. I work closely with Scottish Environment Link on a lot of issues, and I'm part of their INS steering group. And I also have experience of INS from my time working as the Advocacy Officer for Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels.
So you mentioned INS there, which are invasive non-native species, which leads nicely on to my next question, really. Could you tell us a bit more about INS, which is the theme of this episode?
INS are species that have been transported out of their native range by humans, either deliberately or accidentally, and which, once established, are known to cause environmental or socio-economic damage. And INS have been identified as one of the 5 direct drivers of global biodiversity loss and are also one of the top drivers of loss in Scotland. INS drive biodiversity loss by putting pressure on native species. They can outcompete natives for food and living space, wipe out populations through predation, and spread disease. This happens because native species have not had a chance to evolve defences or a competitive edge against the introduced species, so are basically unprepared for their arrival.
So that's why invasive non-native species are such a problem. They really do harm native populations. So, are there any examples of well-known or perhaps less well-known invasive non-native species that people might or might not have heard of?
So one high-profile invasive plant species is Rhododendron ponticum. This is an ornamental shrub from Asia and is a very popular garden plant. Rhododendron ponticum spreads really easily in the wild, and this is bad news for our native woodlands, particularly Scotland's rare and internationally important temperate rainforest habitat on the west coast. Another non-native plant which causes issues is Sitka spruce. Sitka is a coniferous tree from North America, which is commonly planted as a forestry crop, so is of economic importance to Scotland. But because of their economic importance, tree species used in commercial forestry are exempt from INS regulations. But Sitka is increasingly spreading into important habitats such as peatlands and ancient woodlands. We want to see more action from the forestry industry in preventing the spread of Sitka outside of plantation boundaries, and we'd like to see a polluter pays principle applied to self-seeding Sitka. The New Zealand flatworm is an invasive invertebrate which makes its way into the UK in horticultural soil imports. It's considered one of the top INS of concern by DEFRA because it preys on native earthworms and can decimate populations once established.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think when we talk about invasive non-native species, I think people often think of some of the more well-known characters that we'll encounter later in this episode, particularly, the grey squirrels that again, we'll hear about in a short while. But plants are no less important in the invasive non-native species category. It's important to recognise them as posing problems as well. So what work is going on to tackle that? Obviously they're a big problem. What work is happening to kind of prevent the biodiversity loss that INS can cause?
Well, ideally we would prevent INS arriving here in the first place, and the best way of doing this would be to enhance the biosecurity measures in place for importing goods from abroad. So the next best thing to prevention is early detection and rapid response to stop INS spreading into parts of the country where they are not yet established. And we can improve on this by increasing public awareness of inns so that they are more likely to be reported when first spotted by members of the public. For the inns that are already established and widespread in Scotland, all we can do is try to control them, or where possible, attempt to completely eradicate them. In general, attempting to control an inn once it is established is usually a very difficult and expensive process. Scottish Environment Link recently released a report which we contributed to, and this outlines 10 inns response principles for action. The principles include acting early, being strategic, and working at the correct ecological scales. All too often, action on inns is done in a piecemeal fashion on short funding cycles, and this can be a false economy because as soon as control stops in an area, inns will move back in. At the moment, inns control in Scotland relies heavily on volunteers, and although these volunteers are making an amazing contribution to the control effort, we really need to see more paid professionals in these roles. Nature Scot is currently developing the National Inns Plan for Scotland, and we're hoping that they will take advantage of the large amount of collective experience on inns that has gone into the SE Links Inns report and draw from it and work with us to develop an effective inns plan which recognises the damage that inns are doing to Scotland's biodiversity and tackles the problem head on with appropriate urgency.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think when we talk about invasive species control, we quite often think about the on-the-ground control work, which is, as we'll hear shortly, no less important. But it's interesting to talk about the behind-the-scenes work a bit more, and it's great to hear about some of the effort that goes into those reports and some of the supporting knowledge, preventing inns actually getting their roots or paws or whatever it might be into our native landscape. So yeah, that's really interesting. Hazel, thank you very much for your time today, and yeah, it's been great chatting.
Nice chatting to you too.
A big thank you to Hazel for taking the time out to have a chat there, which really sets the scene quite nicely for our second feature today.
So, for our second segment, we are joined by Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels project, who are here to talk about our iconic tufted-eared little red squirrels and all about the hard work that the project pursues when it comes to their conservation.
My name's Katie and I'm the Communications and Engagement Officer for Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels. Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels is a partnership project. We're led by the Scottish Wildlife Trust. We have support from the Scottish Government's Nature Restoration Fund, which is managed by Nature Scot along with other partners. And we've been working since 2009 to protect red squirrels in priority areas where they are threatened in Scotland. We're sitting on a very beautiful bench at the Scottish Wildlife Trust's Loch of the Lowes Nature Reserve. And we're looking out onto the loch. It's very beautiful and sunny. This is a fantastic place to see red squirrels, and it's known for that. And I'm hoping that we might see some today. I'm keeping a close watch into the trees to see if we can spot any. Loch of the Lowes is actually positioned in a really critical place for red squirrels in Scotland, and this is because it sits directly on the Highland Boundary fault line, which runs diagonally through Scotland from Helensburgh in the southwest up to Stonehaven in the northeast. And north of the Highland Boundary fault there are no grey squirrels, and we're working hard to defend it and stop them from incurring into the healthy red-only area of the Scottish Highlands. Grey squirrels are an introduced species. They were introduced by the Victorians in the late 19th, early 20th century. And the reason why they're classified as an invasive species is because they are larger and more robust than our native reds, but they fulfill the same ecological niche. And because they breed in larger quantities, they outcompete red squirrels for food and habitat. And they make it very difficult for red squirrels to successfully breed and for their young to survive. And scientific research has shown that when grey squirrels move into new areas, red squirrels can be completely replaced within about 15 years. And they have actually replaced red squirrels in most of England and Wales and many parts of Scotland. And yeah, it's an unnatural man-made problem that we have a responsibility to manage. Grey squirrels are also a problem because they brought squirrel pox with them, which is a virus that they carry that doesn't harm them at all, but is deadly to reds. And it's usually fatal to most red squirrels within about 2 weeks. So there's been modelling done that shows that if grey squirrels also have squirrel pox, they can replace red squirrels about 20 times as fast as through competition alone. So they're a really significant problem for red squirrels, and we're doing our very best to try and preserve and enhance the red squirrel populations in Scotland that are so special to our natural heritage. We are working in priority areas that are designated as being most significant in terms of the grey squirrel threat to reds. So we have 3 kind of distinct priority areas where we're working. So the first is in the northeast of Scotland, and that is in Aberdeen City and the kind of surrounding countryside. And we've been working there again since 2009, and our aim there actually is to eradicate grey squirrels. And the reason that we're able to aim so high is because that grey squirrel population are totally isolated from all the other grey squirrels in the UK. They were introduced in the 1970s, so much later on, and they were a zoo escape. And so for that reason, they're effectively treated as an island population of grey squirrels because, they're not joined onto any others. So there we're undertaking monitoring and grey squirrel control to try and eradicate grey squirrels. Our second priority area is across the Highland Boundary Fault Line. So that's this geographical fault line that runs diagonally through Scotland, and it separates out the grey squirrel populations from the red-only areas in Scotland. So north of that line, there are only red squirrels. So that would be what we would classify as the Highlands, typically, broadly speaking. Those areas only have reds in them at the moment, so grey squirrels have not pushed that far north yet. So what we're doing is working across that line to stop grey squirrels from moving any further north. There are sort of key incursion routes which we are monitoring, like the one that we're on right now along the Tay, but also along the Tummel and into places like Angus, and also in the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park as well. And then the third area is in the south of Scotland. Here we have priority areas for red squirrel conservation, or parks, which are kind of key areas where there are red squirrel populations still remaining in the south of Scotland. And here we are supporting independent red squirrel volunteer groups, which we set up in previous phases of the project. And they are working independently from us, but with some support to enable community action to reduce grey squirrel populations. And we also have some staffing presence in that region as well.
I'm the lead grey squirrel control officer in the south of Scotland. So that's the whole of Dumfries and Galloway right across to the borders. And we have a team of around 4 at this time, covering that whole area. About 80% of my time's taken up doing grey squirrel control work. You select an area where you observe grey squirrels, or you suspect grey squirrels might be, or there's been sightings, and you go in and you set in live cage traps. And when you set the live cage traps in, they're actually locked open as safe, so they're no trapping. And you pre-bait them up with a bait of maize, peanuts, sunflower seeds, and you use it kind of like a monitoring station. We can set trail cameras up beside those traps on occasion, but generally we just use our sort of own knowledge and experience, and we leave it for a few days. We'll go back and check the trap. If it looks like there's been squirrel activity, we'll then put the trap as live and set the trap. Once that trap's set, we have a legal requirement to check those traps twice a day. So when I've set the trap, say I'll go in the morning, I'll set it, I'll go back in the afternoon, check it, anything in there, we'll deal with it, go back the next morning, check it, and so the cycle will carry on till I'm happy that that area has been trapped out. Once that's been trapped out, the trap will either be removed or it'll be locked as safe so that you can't trap anymore. When I'm in that area trapping, if I catch anything that is a non-target species that is not a grey squirrel, it just gets released. Because we're checking them twice a day, they come to no harm, they're quite happy, they've got food, they're safe, and they get let go. However, if we get a grey squirrel, then we have to carry out a dispatch, and we dispatch them in the most humane way that we can to ensure there's no suffering on the animal's part. So in the south of Scotland, our work helps, by carrying out grey control, it helps conserve the red squirrel populations that we have. We're quite fortunate round here in the south, Dumfries and Galloway and the borders, in that we have significant numbers of red squirrels still here. So as long as we can keep the grey numbers down, then the red squirrel populations should remain safe unless there's an outbreak of squirrel pox. Any work that we carry out is ensuring that the red squirrel population in the south of Scotland survives until such times as we can find an alternative solution to the control that we currently carry out. Unfortunately, in the south, we have constant migration of grey squirrels coming in across the border from the north of England and from the central belt of Scotland coming down. One of our main jobs is to try and stop those two populations becoming too heavily involved with each other, because that then would stop any squirrel pox virus spreading among all of the grey, because not all grey populations carry the squirrel pox virus. So if we can keep the ones from the south away from the ones in the north, that then would ensure that the mass squirrel pox virus outbreaks that we can see doesn't get into the sort of above the Highland line. We have 17 volunteer groups that were set up during the previous developing community action phase across the south of Scotland. So again, Dumfries and Galloway right across the borders. They're all independent groups now, but in our full-time role we do support those groups. They do survey work, they do monitoring, and they also do trapping. They do carry out dispatch, and all dispatch they carry out, they've all been trained by SSRS staff. So they have trained to the same standards as our dispatchers, so they know what they're doing, and they're doing dispatch in the same humane ways that we do.
I'm Marlo Bushman. I am the Community Coordination and Outreach Officer for Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels in the Northeast. My day-to-day can be really quite variable. The point of my role is to expand our project within this network that we've built in the northeast of Scotland, in Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire. Because our work covers a geographic area, we have to be quite strategic about how we kind of expand in this area and which areas we focus on within the whole space. So my role has a lot of focus on that, where our gaps are, how we should be expanding in this area, and then doing that outreach. So door-to-door outreach, but also supporting our network of volunteers that we have who survey in this whole area. It's primarily monitoring that we're doing right now, since this is a grey squirrel eradication project in the northeast. And at this point in the project, we have very, very few grey squirrels left in the city. So there's a big focus on finding them. We're just having to survey all throughout the city in any area with habitat that grey squirrels would prefer to live in. So we're trying to cover as much of that as possible. And so through monitoring surveys, we have about, I think at the moment, just under 400 feeder boxes in the city. And that's ever growing based on my role. I mean, just yesterday I was putting out more feeder boxes in a different part of town that we haven't been surveying. So starting a survey there. So my fieldwork will involve setting up new surveys, covering surveys that volunteers aren't able to do temporarily, and also door-to-door outreach. Aberdeen is quite interesting and unique as a grey squirrel population control project because it is an island population that's separate from the kind of migratory population south of us. It is the most northerly settled population of grey squirrels as well, so it's quite significant in that way. It's at risk of expansion, into the Highlands from here, expansion west from here. But it's unique because it was a small population of grey squirrels introduced from southern England back in the 1970s, was brought up to Aberdeen City to be placed in a zoo here. And the grey squirrels escaped literally the same night that they were put in place here. So it was only, 10 or 20 grey squirrels that were released in Aberdeen City, but since then the population exploded, and it still remained an isolated population from the southern population. So genetically it's quite isolated, quite different from, say, the grey squirrels that you'd find in even Angus, in Montrose, but it is good for this project because it makes eradication actually possible, which is what we're working on now, because we've gotten the population to very low numbers. The important part of an eradication project is being able to make sure that the circumstances of this population are not at risk of reintroduction. So obviously, you can't achieve, say, for example, even if you were to remove all of the grey squirrels in Edinburgh, it wouldn't be an eradication project because they would immediately be able to colonize back into Edinburgh without any sort of population control project of the outskirts of Edinburgh. Like, they would just come back in. So it's unique here because based on the amazing work done by our Highland Line team and the borders and, just all the kind of focused conservation work that we have in Scotland, there currently isn't a population of grey squirrels ready to be reintroduced into Aberdeen City. So they're isolated here, and we're able to kind of focus just within this area and do that.
If successful in Aberdeen City, it will be the first eradication of an invasive mammal species on a mainland worldwide, we think. That would be amazing, so watch this space. We still have a lot of work to do, but that's what's happening in that area. The first incredibly useful thing that people can do is to report their sightings of both red and grey squirrels on our website. So this just takes a couple of minutes, but it's really invaluable, and it helps us to basically build an idea of where population distributions are across the country. The more sightings that we get, the more accurate we can be, and it's really, really helpful to us. So even if you just have a couple of minutes and you've seen a grey or a red squirrel out in your garden whilst you're out for a walk, doesn't matter where from, where in the country, we're interested in everything, then please do report that on our website. That's really, really helpful. This can be done all year round, but we are especially asking people to keep your eyes open and go squirrel spotting in the first week of October, when we will be running our annual Great Scottish Squirrel Survey. So the aim of this survey is to gather as many sightings as possible in 1 week to collate a week-long snapshot of squirrel distributions across Scotland. So you can do all of this on our website, which is scottishsquirrels.org.uk. Apart from this, if you have a little bit more time and you live in one of our priority areas, you can get involved by volunteering with us or by joining one of the independent squirrel groups in the south of Scotland and or hosting a grey squirrel trap in your garden. So there's lots of different volunteering opportunities available, from grey squirrel control to surveying, public engagement, organisational activities, admin. So if you're interested, do get in touch with us. Again, you can find out more information on our website, or you can email us at squirrels@scottishwildlifetrust.org.uk.
Well, a big thank you there to the Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels team for having a chat. I love hearing about the work that they're doing across Scotland. And it's really important, I think, to say as well, the work in Aberdeen is at such a critical point. They've reached this point where they've reduced the numbers to such a low level, but there is so much hard work to do. Tracking that low number of grey squirrels across the whole of Aberdeen is such hard work. So the eradication work has been successful so far, but I know for a fact, I was talking to Marla about this, there is still a huge amount of work to be done. So again, a huge thanks to the Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels team there.
Like you said, it's such an incredible project, and I think the staff and the volunteers are so inspiring. The amount of time they dedicate to the cause and the positivity they bring to it is just amazing.
Absolutely.
Have you ever seen a red squirrel, Ed? You must get some up your neck of the woods.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually saw one the other day, but the first time I saw a red squirrel, I'd come up to Scotland. It was before I moved. I was on holiday, and I got up really, really early, like crack of dawn early, to go and find one. Drove quite a long way. I got out the car expecting to have to walk miles and miles to spot one, and I was tying my shoelaces, tying up my boots to go for a walk, and I hadn't even left the car park, and there was two of them sat in a tree, almost laughing at me. So
very lucky.
Yeah, that was my first time seeing a red squirrel.
Amazing.
Quite a characterful encounter, but yeah, always good to see them. They're such beautiful little creatures.
Oh, always. I mean, I'm based in the Central Belt, so it's not often a common sight for me. And yeah, I'm just filled with so much joy when I see one. You always feel really lucky.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you see them all the time, I think it's still just, such an amazing experience.
Absolutely. I mean, if people want to help with squirrel conservation, Rachel, I think there's some big stuff coming up. Could you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So like Katie had mentioned and yourself there, Ed, so the 6th annual Great Scottish Squirrel Survey, which is a bit of a tongue twister, will be taking place very soon. So it's between the 30th of September and the 6th of October. And it's a really easy way to help the project, and it only takes a few minutes of your time. So if you head over to scottishsquirrels.org.uk, You can record your squirrel sightings there, but also just find out more information. So essentially, it's get outside, spot a squirrel and record your sightings. And essentially, it helps create a snapshot of squirrel populations across the country. So it doesn't matter, if it's in your back garden or if you spot one at the side of the road or, in the wider countryside, all sightings are valuable. So yeah, like I said, head over to the website, pop your sightings in. It only takes a few minutes. And it really helps the project understand, how squirrel populations are changing over time. And it also helps them kind of focus their critical conservation efforts. Another tongue twister there. So yeah, it's such a simple way to really make a big impact of the project and help save these cute little red squirrels.
Absolutely. Now, Rachel, I understand that recently you were down somewhere in Dumfries and Galloway that is quite a hotspot for red squirrels.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of heading down to Carstramon Wood, which is one of the Trust reserves down near Gatehouse of Fleet, so yeah, in Dumfries and Galloway, which is somewhere I'd never been before. So I was met on the reserve by Peter Garson, who is the volunteer reserve convener, as well as a few other local Trust volunteers. And like you said, it's a hotspot for red squirrels, and there's some fantastic work going there. So, for our last and final segment of the podcast series, I suppose, Peter and the volunteers give us a sort of fantastic overview of Carstramon Woods, the species that call it home, and some of the vital work that's been done on the reserve. Morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming. So, if you don't know, we're here for like a little bit of a storytelling event, just to hear all about Carstramon Woods and your relationship with it and the wildlife here and everything you get up to.
Well, hello, I'm David Steele, the chairman of the Gatehouse Development Initiative, and our volunteers, the National Scenic Area volunteers, Fleet Valley volunteers, have been involved in the woods here over quite a number of years. And these woods, as well as being so important for nature, they have a really long history. Hundreds of years they've been owned by the Murray family who lived at Gatehouse, and they have a long industrial history as well, because when you're in the woods you can see that the trees have been copsed over the years, and that was initially for the production of charcoal. And within the woods in different places, you can see the platforms where the charcoal was burnt. So as well as looking to see bird boxes and things like that, you can discover places where the charcoal was made. And in later years, from about the mid-1850s, the wood here and in other woods round Gatehouse was used for the production of bobbins for the cotton industry. And before that also, the bark of the oak trees was used for tanning that took place in Gatehouse. So plenty of industrial uses. And the woods they're surrounded by dry stone dikes, the walls from this part of the world. And this part of Galloway is really celebrated for its walls because the Dry Stone Walling Association of Great Britain was founded here in Gatehouse over 50 years ago, and the volunteers have been quite involved in the work of looking after the walls. We've been round removing vegetation from places so that Dyker can come in and repair the walls, and from time to time a tree collapses a bit of dyke, and once the tree's been cut, we've again been involved in helping to mend the gap so that the woods can be stock-proof. And what's been really nice is that on a number of occasions we've done what you might call intergenerational work with some of our older volunteers, but also young people who've been working with the Wildlife Trust as summer interns, really. So it's given a diking experience to the young people, but also to the old ones as well. So there's lots and lots to the woods, but it's not just the nature.
All the planted oak is English oak, Quercus robur. And the little bit on top that Peter mentioned, there is some pedunculate oak, but when the birds come, they don't care. And But that is the major difference. It's two different species of oak that we're thinking about. And an English oak, Quercus robur, is an incomer, like ever so many voices round here.
Despite the fact it's called English oak, it does occur naturally in Scotland.
Yes.
Yeah, so that means that the oaks on the Dún na Carstramon are actually ancient woodland, meaning they date from before 1600 probably.
With this sort of, I guess, array of oak, what are your kind of common bird species here?
The really commons are blue tits and great tits and cull tits, as elsewhere. Of the migrants, one wonderful bird called a wood warbler that comes in small numbers but sings incredibly well. Only thing wrong with it doesn't nest in a nest box, it nests on the ground. The blue tits and great tits try to share or try to get their share of any nest boxes from the most important bird this wood has ever known, called a pied flycatcher. There are 130 nest boxes in here, nominally for pied flycatchers, but normally only about 40 of those would be occupied, and the pied flycatcher spends its winters in Central Africa. At the present time, they're picking up the insects that are surrounding the fig trees in France, Spain and Portugal, which is why their scientific name is Faichnie, meaning fig loving. They don't love figs, they merely love the insects that love figs.
A few years ago, probably about 2018 I think, a guy called Roland Ashcroft, who is in the squirrel group in Gatehouse, decided he was going to try and do a population survey in Carstramon. And so he put up, I think, 11 trail cams with associated flip-top box feeders with nuts and seeds in them for red squirrels. And over the course of several weeks, he collected several thousand photographs of squirrels visiting these boxes. And then he had the awesome task of finding out how many individual squirrels visited each box and how many squirrels visited more than one box. After several weeks' work, the answer was 8. Which means that density-wise, you've got 1 squirrel per 10 hectares, which means 10 squirrels per square kilometre. Grey squirrels evolved in an oak hickory dominated forest type in North America, and the oaks over there, like the oaks over here, have very high tannin levels in their acorns, and grey squirrels have therefore evolved the ability to tolerate tannins in their diet to a much greater extent than red squirrels have. So that's why grey squirrels have a tremendous feeding advantage in deciduous woodlands everywhere in the UK compared with reds. Hence their ability to outcompete reds over the vast majority of England and Wales. And they're now here, the grey squirrels, trying to repeat the performance north of the border. And there are still red squirrels in northern England, which are also confronting the same problem. The humans involved, like me, are trying to control the grey squirrels to at least a low density so that the red squirrels can persist in these sorts of places. And that's quite a difficult thing to do, because the only tools of the trade that we really have are trapping and shooting of grey squirrels. But obviously you've got to be very sure that when you do that activity successfully, you're not damaging the red squirrel population at the same time. So trapping is very laborious, because you have to go around the traps very frequently, several times a day preferably, in order to let red squirrels, and indeed other bycatch species as they're called, birds for instance, pigeons, pheasants, whatever, that go in for the seeds and nuts that we leave for the squirrels, to let them out. And there's a bigger problem, and that is that the grey squirrel carry this squirrel pox virus, which quite a high proportion of them carry, but it's completely benign in grey squirrels. They just carry it and they don't suffer from it at all. But if that virus infects a red squirrel, it will die within 3 days to a fortnight. And red squirrels that are infected with the virus are highly infectious themselves, much more so than grey squirrels are. So an infected red is the scary prospect that we confront all the time. Similarly, with things like feeders and traps and bird feeders in people's gardens, if you've got reds and greys visiting at the same time, you're highly likely to facilitate the transmission of the disease. All of which is bad news for the reds, of course. Now, the other problem about grey squirrels is they're bigger, they breed faster, they can have 3 litters a year. Red squirrels never have more than 2 as far as we know, and many of them only have 1. And the grey squirrels live at far higher densities, especially in woodlands like this, mixed deciduous and coniferous woodland, all of which counts against the red squirrel in a situation where they're co-occurring. So they tend to disappear without any influence of pox in a few years, shall we say. But there is a knight in shining armour in the shape of the pine marten, which has made an absolutely miraculous recovery in Scotland, particularly in the Highlands. It was restricted to an area of the Northwest Highlands where it was living in rocky scree because it had run out of woodland to live in, because it had been persecuted virtually out of existence throughout Scotland and the rest of the UK. And a combination of legislation and education has resulted in a massive expansion of the pine marten's range. So it's now occurring right across to the east coast of Scotland, having spread from the west in the Highlands. And also there's a reintroduction of pine martens done by the then Forestry Commission into Glen Trool, which is a bit west of here, in 1981. A small reintroduction, but some of those animals survived and they lived in the Galloway Forest Park, as it now is, more or less exclusively, I think, for probably 30 of those years. And then they started to break out because there were enough of them to get out of the wood. And since then, there's been a major expansion of pine marten distribution in southwest Scotland. And this has been accompanied by the putting up of den boxes for martens, both in the conifer forest from which they originated, where there are very few or no tree holes, so it's not a very good place for pine martens to live, and they've certainly taken to those boxes in a big way and have doubled in density and have produced more young, and the result of that has been that more martens have come out of that woodland into these kinds of woodlands where they seem to be prospering. And our efforts now, putting boxes up, not only in this reserve but in many of the other surrounding woodlands near to Gatehouse, is going to further encourage the pine martens to help us to help the reds.
So a final big thank you to Peter and the volunteers from down in Carstramon Wood. I had a great day. I mean, it was a very wet day, as per usual of Scottish summer, but I often quite like that kind of weather, you know, when you're out on a woodland walk and the kind of canopy does protect you a little bit from the rain, and it just feels like everything's coming alive a little bit. But yeah, it's a truly fantastic place, and the volunteers have so much knowledge and passion for the area, which is really inspiring, and the volunteers sort of fit every niche and everyone comes together really well.
Well, that has been our final feature of the whole series. So it's quite sad. I'm quite sad that we've got to this point now. But hopefully everyone's enjoyed. I mean, Rachel, if you had to pick a favourite feature from all of the 7 episodes, what would you pick?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question. I have to say I really enjoyed hearing from Laura, our shepherdess at the Scottish Wildlife Trust, because what a cool job and something that I never actually knew much about, even working from the Trust. And I think that's probably quite like a takeaway for me from the whole podcast series, is just how much I've learned working at the Trust. There's just so much that goes on. And obviously I love the opportunity to go to the Isle of Egg and meet the volunteers there, because again, such a unique kind of volunteer role and a bunch of folk. So I think if I had to pick, that would be my answer.
Good choice.
What about yourself, Ed?
I mean, I really, really enjoyed recording with the Living Seas team, mainly because we got to hang out on a beach, which was pretty cool. We just got to sit and watch the world go by while chatting about kind of the amazing work that they're doing there. But yeah, I've loved them all equally, and a fantastic chance to go up to Benmore Koyak and chat to some of the local people there, and visit Nick and Josie at the tree nursery and the Little Ascent Tree Nursery that are doing some fantastic work. And that landscape up in the northwest of Scotland is absolutely beautiful. So again, another fantastic opportunity. But yeah, it's just been a whole experience, and I've really, really enjoyed chatting to everyone and finding out more about all of the intricacies of what happens and exploring all of the work across the Trust. And even for us that work here, it's quite exciting to find out more about just the huge amount of stuff that's happening and the huge amount of work that is going on across the Scottish Wildlife Trust as a whole.
Oh, definitely. I've absolutely loved it. And yeah, I mean, a big thank you, I suppose, as well, for all our guests and those that have came on and told their stories, and all the work that's gone into the events and the people that came along to them and everyone that's helped behind the scenes. It's been fantastic. And I suppose our listeners as well for tuning in and hearing some of the amazing work that's been done. But I think my big thanks should be to you, Ed, as well. Save the best for last. I mean, I think we can all agree that you're definitely made for the radio. But you have honestly put so much work into the podcast, and I think it really shows. I mean, it definitely shows. So I think a massive thank you for you. You've been an excellent co-host.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Rachel. I couldn't have done it without your help. But like Rachel says, a huge thank you to everyone that's chatted. And hopefully all of our listeners who are enjoying this, keep listening. These episodes are going to be out there, so feel free to dip back in and relive some of those brilliant moments that we've had from across the series. But as we've heard already, we have got the Words of the Wild writing competition that is still out there. So do enter that and keep an eye on that. For more information, head over to our website. But again, one final enormous thank you for listening to Words of the Wild.